Hello. Today's tutorial is going to start with one of the most important places you can start any storytelling project or any project for that matter, and that is your why. We're going to talk about what your values are and how to capture and share those values in the form of story. So, the topic is how to curate a canon of personal stories that showcase what's most important to you. So, let's break that phrase down. Curate a canon. Start with the word canon. What is a canon? One of the most common canons that we think of today is the Bible. And the Bible is a collection of stories. These are the stories that have withstood the test of time, that were gathered of all the possible stories that could be told to share the values of a group of people and of a religion. These are the ones that were deemed the best, the most important, maybe the most reliable, and that were basically edited into the version of scripture that we have today. Now, of course, there are parts of the Bible that are not stories. And those are the parts we tend to gloss over, right? They're boring and we don't really care that much about them. Let's focus on the stories. And why stories? Because stories are the way that we convey our values, how we teach without being preachy. Humans are wired for story. It's the way that we learn, and it's the way that we transmit our values from generation to generation. It's the way we share our culture. Just we are wired to learn by story. So it's no accident that the Bible is a collection of stories that tell values. So for you, your canon will be the collection of stories from your life, from your professional world that most showcase what's important to you. So I want you to pause right now. I have an exercise for you. So get a pen, pause this video if you need to. Go get a pen and paper. Ready? Okay. I want you to think about if there is one thing you have learned in this life that's important to you that you would most want to share with your family. Let's say your children, your grandchildren, someone from a future generation, or maybe you don't have children or grandchildren, but someone who might read your stories someday. What would you want to share that you have learned in this life? The most important thing. Maybe there's two or three things. It doesn't have to be just one. And if several come to mind, I'd like you to jot those things down. What have you learned that you just know to the core to be true and important? That is your why. Those values are the heart that drive you forward, that help, that guide you in important situations. And those values are what you want to build your canon of stories around. So we've identified what a canon is. We've identified kind of what your why is. We'll talk more about why in a minute, your why in other contexts. But now I want to define the portion of that phrase, curate your canon, the curate part of it. To curate, I like to think of in terms of like what a museum has. In a museum, you may have thousands of artifacts down in the basement, on shelves, locked away, of varying degrees of interest. So, of the thousands, maybe tens of thousands, I don't know, big museums, how many items do they have? Millions, maybe. Of all of the items they have in their collections, which ones do they bring up into the light and display with plenty of white space around them in a beautiful glass case, perhaps with a write up that gives context and shares why this artifact or painting or other object is important enough to showcase for all the world in a beautiful case? That's what it means to curate. It means to pull those things that are the most important and that will most inspire others. So when you think of your life is a collection of stories in your memory. Which are the ones that you want to spend some time bringing into the light and showcasing beautifully? You won't put thousands of items on the shelf, just like you won't tell every single minute of everything that happened in your life. Which are the moments that are worthy of your time to develop into stories that really share your values. So that's the heart of what we're doing today, is helping you identify which stories should be part of your canon. And then we'll talk a little bit about how to develop those into stories that will most resonate and be interesting and inspire others. So, I have some story prompts that will help you identify some of your most important stories. And the first one is, what was the greatest lesson your mentor taught you? Now, your mentor might be, maybe it was a person in your first job when you were a teenager who taught you how to work, or taught you how to do a job right, or taught you the value of taking care of the customer. Maybe it was a teacher. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was a boss that you had later in your life, or someone who shared something important to you. Maybe it was a parent. So think about who your mentor was, or mentors, there can be more than one. And then what were the most important things, maybe one thing or things that that person taught you? Those values and those moments are the heart of great stories. If you can share a time when your mentor taught you something important, that's a story. And it's a story that you should share. It's a story you should share with your loved ones, and a story that you should share professionally and in the workplace. And I want to talk for a minute about why curating stories in the workplace and professionally is so important. You may have, maybe you have a job and it's like you're not self-employed. You can have a collection of stories that share your personal values with your team members. Maybe if you put some effort into a repertoire of stories, you can pull it out when you're in a job interview, when you get asked a question, tell me about a time when. It would be great to have some compelling, specific stories available to share your why. Because I'm going to pause here. People don't so much care what you say, or how you say it, or what you do, what your product is. They care why you do what you do and why you believe. And if you can convey that in a job interview or with a team member, they will connect with you. You will be memorable, and it will share your values. Let's say you're self-employed or you have your own business. This is one of the most important times when you can share your personal values, because you want those around you to embrace those values and to act as you yourself would in any given situation. So these are stories you can prepare to teach a particular concept. So tell me about a time, or tell me about the greatest lesson that your mentor taught you. It's a great story to tell. Another story that's great in a professional setting is, tell me about a time someone did the right thing. This might also be in your childhood. I can think of a time my dad taught me not to steal. I was probably 3 years old and I took a peanut out of a bin at a grocery store, and he saw it in my chubby fist in the car, and I got a lesson on we don't steal. Oh my gosh, I was mortified. But I never forgot it. And I knew from then on uh, why we don't take peanuts and why we don't take candy. It's a story I've told my daughter. So tell me a time when someone did the right thing. Maybe it was taking care of the customer. Maybe it was refunding their money. Maybe it was going the extra mile. Maybe it was putting your arm around a coworker and lifting them up. So think about the time someone did the right thing. Another great story is, when did your product or service make the difference? It could also be in your family. When was a time when a member of your family rendered an act of service that really made a difference for someone? I can think of times when my parents, they took in refugees. My parents gave up their own bed for refugees from Vietnam for several weeks while they lived in our home, while they slept on the couch. That taught me something about service. So, what's a time in your business when your service made a tremendous difference? I can think of times when I worked at the technical college when an instructor went out of their way to put their arm around a student and say, don't give up. You can do this. I believe in you. Maybe pushed the student or did something that kept that student from giving up. Those were stories I collected and stories that I shared with my team. I often loved to tell stories about a coworker who did something wonderful that made a difference for a student, because those stories inspired team members to do likewise. So the more you can share stories about doing the right thing, the more you can inspire people to do the same. Now, here is a question. This is my all-time favorite question in any setting. And if you've been following Evalogue.Life for any period of time, you've probably heard this one, but I'm going to tell it again. And this question is, tell me about a time you didn't know if you would make it. It might be a time when you were physically in danger and you didn't know if you would live. Maybe an illness had you wondering if you were going to make it physically. Those times change you deeply. They change your perspective. They change your what you focus on as most important. There are times when you have to dig really deep, and when you come out the other side, you are not the same person as when you went into it. Now that this question has many applications. It could be a time when you didn't know if your relationship would make it, but you stuck it out and you were glad you did. And this is how your relationship was stronger as a result. It might be a time, like I said, physical danger. Maybe in business, you didn't know if your business would make it, or if you were going to make it in your profession or your hobby or your art. You were almost ready to give up, but then something inspired you to keep going. You learned, you dug deep, and you came out the other side having learned something important. These, if I can only tell one story, usually that's the one I want to tell because it's the one that will be most inspiring. It shows us in our darkest hour and how we came out of it and how we became a transformed person. And finally, maybe I should have led with this one because this is a question I usually lead with. If I'm doing an oral history interview, it's one of the first questions I ask, and that is, how did you start? Or how did you meet? So in oral history, if it's a couple, I may often ask them, how did the two of you meet? It's not only a great icebreaker, it's usually easy for people to warm up. It's a fun story to tell, but I like to start with beginnings because beginnings are a great place to start. And by the way, beginnings are called Genesis stories. Any story about the birth of a child, the starting of a business, the starting of your career, the starting of a relationship. These are all Genesis stories. And in them contain the seeds of your values. Your why is embedded in the DNA of your Genesis story. And that's why it's an important one to tell. The other reason I love asking the question about when did you start is there's usually a very specific moment and a specific story behind it. It's not very interesting to tell stories about generalities. It's really not interesting to beat someone over the head with the moral of the story and what you should do and to be preachy. It doesn't work and no one wants to hear it. We do, however, want to hear a specific story. So in your writing, if you have a tendency to write, we would on a given day do this and that, I'm telling you, don't. Write about a specific day. On January 23rd, 1978, my brother and I, dot, dot, dot. When you hear those words, the reader or the listener is going to perk up because they can tell something important happened on that day. So a specific story about how you began is interesting and it's a story. So those are the 5 questions that I want you to think about in curating your own canon of personal and professional stories. And I want you to have this canon ready and available when you have an opportunity to tell your children, your grandchildren, your coworkers, your employees a story. I have a 7-year-old daughter and she regularly asks me to tell her a story. And I will tell you that I've put some thought into the stories that I want to tell her. Sometimes when I'm telling a story that is just funny and it seems like there's no point to it other than that it's funny, there is a reason I'm telling her. I'm telling her about her grandparents in a way that makes them human and interesting, and it makes them alive, and it makes her feel a connection to them. So can you hear my dog? My dog is rolling around on the floor. So there's background noise. Anyhow, um, but I tell her a story about my parents when they were young and fun because she didn't know them when they were young and fun, and I want them to have a connection. So even the funny stories, they should have a point, and ideally there will be a deeper message with them. So get thinking about your own canon. And then once you've identified a canon of stories you might want to tell, then you have a job of actually curating them and polishing them and making them shine and look beautiful. So there's some effort involved in actually making your stories shine. And the more effort you put into storyboarding them so they hit the emotional beats and trimming the fat and getting really to the heart of it, the more compelling your stories will be. So I want to give you a little case study here. And I'm telling you this not because this tutorial is about me. It's not. It's about you. And I'm telling you this because I hope it might inspire you to do the same. So you may or may not have ever heard the story about the time I found a letter from my dad. I put this into a video, and I'm going to give you the link to watch this video. It's 90 seconds, so it's only 90 seconds of your life. But there was a time when I was really struggling because I was considering quitting my day job, a really good day job. I had a great salary. I was an executive, was a vice president, and was well paid. Well, I loved my work. I loved the people I worked with. It was a great environment. I had a great boss. Like there was nothing that led me to be unhappy other than that I had felt something shift, and I felt there was something that I had to do, and I had the opportunity to do it. My side hustle was heating up, and I knew I couldn't continue to do both, and I had to make a choice. And in that moment, I found this letter from my dad at random in a box of silly notes that were written to me in junior high from friends. I was looking through it one day and I found this letter with my dad's handwriting, and my heart started to beat fast because I knew whose handwriting it was, and I didn't recognize the letter. And I opened it, and it was this letter he had written to me when I was 13 years old. And I had no memory of ever receiving that letter or ever reading it. And it felt like my dad had written this letter to me and mailed it into the future so that it would arrive on the exact date that I needed to hear from him. And what he told me in that letter was so profound and inspiring that it helped me have the courage to take the leap of faith and follow in my parents' footsteps. They were entrepreneurs too, and I did the same. So that's the story of how I quit my day job. So after I found that letter, there was a process though of that moment that happened that had a profound impact on me, and ending up with a 90-second video to tell that story. And it went something like this. In the days following receiving that letter, I could hardly talk about it. I couldn't talk about it. I would start telling someone I'd found this letter, and my eyes would well up with tears, and I almost couldn't speak. Every time I thought about it, I would like go into tears. And even now, I can see my eyes getting a little emotional thinking about it. But I gradually told the story a few times. I actually told it to a group of students one day. And then I went to a storytelling festival at our local university. And there was what's called a story slam, where you get on stage and you tell a 6-minute story. I went to a workshop on how to do a story slam. Now, mind you, I was not comfortable on stage at all. I was terrified of public speaking. I'd done some of it. I did it in my professional job, but I wasn't good at it. I wasn't confident. I got incredibly nervous, incredibly sweaty, and I never considered myself a storyteller. Even though I was kind of a writer, the verbal medium was not comfortable for me at all. But they challenged us the very next day to come back and go on stage and tell a story. And I decided to put myself out there and push myself. So as I was thinking about what story could I tell in 6 minutes, I thought of that moment that had happened a couple years earlier, or maybe it was anyway, a year earlier, when I'd found this letter, and I polished it into a 6-minute story, made myself get on stage, and I told it that story in front of a group of people. It was better, but not perfect. I ended up taking second place in a little competition, so that was all right. Gave me some confidence. And then I decided to take the 6-minute version and make it into a 90-second video. Now, also keep in mind the video that I'm sharing with you was my very first video, not my 20th, not my 50th. This was my first attempt at making a video. I used a free program called Adobe Spark. It's a simple slideshow video with images, a little video clip, and then narrated by me. So I storyboarded the story to capture the essence, and I pared down this longer story. Then I got it to 6 minutes, and then I whittled it down to its very bare essence in 90 seconds. And the result is a story that now I have in my repertoire that I can share. It's produced, so I can send a link to people anytime I want to share one of my values. And this particular story actually hits not just one of the 5 questions that I shared with you earlier, but 2. It shared one of the values that my greatest mentor taught me. My parents taught me that when you have a feeling that there's something you're supposed to do, you go for it. You just do it. So that was one of the greatest values that my parents taught me, so my mentor. And the second was, how did you start? It was a Genesis story. It was how I made the decision to quit my day job and go into full-time writing and storytelling, and this thing that has become my life's passion and purpose. So I hope you enjoy the video. I hope you find it inspiring and know that it didn't just happen. But if I could do it at that phase in my storytelling journey, I know you can do it too, and the results will be worth it, and they will inspire others around you. So that is our tutorial today, to get you started thinking about how to curate your canon of personal and professional stories that will share your values and inspire others. So go to it. Have fun with your homework. Over and out.